So, it's been a minute. A lot has happened since my last video. And honestly, it kind of feels like the world is falling apart, right? Everything is just happening so much. Now, maybe it's the ADHD, but I've been having a really hard time pulling myself away from the news lately. But I also know that that is not good for me, so I've been trying to be more intentional with what I spend my energy on. And as everything got more and more chaotic around me, I started looking for something that was the opposite of all that chaos. Something comfortable and cozy and familiar and relaxing. And what I found was I Spy. Remember I Spy? I loved I Spy as a kid. I had 4 or 5 of the books, and my dad and I would spend hours poring over them together. But when I revisited some of the books I had as a kid, something felt different. The pictures were exactly how I remembered, crowded little worlds filled with buttons and marbles and toy cars. But instead of playing the game of I Spy, I caught myself just looking, just appreciating the pictures for the skill behind them. The images were busy, sure, but every bit of clutter was framed just so, and even the most chaotic pictures had a kind of rhythm to them. But that's when the irony struck me. I was using these messy, chaotic pictures to escape the chaos happening outside. Now, I knew that the chaos of I Spy is artificial, just created in a studio by a professional artist, but it still made me wonder, why was this artificial chaos so much more palatable and comforting even, compared to the chaos of reality? And as I thought through that question, I ended up somewhere I was not expecting. So today I want to talk about that. I want to share this weird experience I had with these silly little kids' books and how that experience changed the way that I am making sense of everything that is happening. But before we get into that, you may have noticed that this video is a fundraiser. Now that means that any AdSense I would be getting from this video will actually be going directly to charity. Now, by the time I was writing the script, and also as I'm filming, I haven't actually decided on a specific charity yet because I have a few in mind, but in any case, the only way that I'm able to do this is because of my Patreon, which you can join to help support me in what I do, and because of folks like Incogni, who very kindly sponsored this extremely silly video about I Spy. Now, I have been using Incogni for over a year now, and I genuinely love this service. So just as you search for hidden objects in I Spy, so too do data brokers search for information about you. They collect your name, address, phone numbers, and even shopping habits, and store and sell that data without you even realizing it. But that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni helps to get your personal information out of the hands of data brokers. You have a right over your own data, but if you wanted to manually contact everyone who had information on you and tell them to get rid of it, it would take years. But Incogni handles the entire process for you, and they make it super easy. You just sign up, give them permission to deal with your data on your behalf, and they immediately get to work. Within just days after I signed up, they had already flagged dozens of brokers with my data, and the removal requests have just kept going. Like, seriously, it's been over a year and they are still finding stuff. I never would have been able to do this myself. Not only is it set it and forget it, but it also gives me real peace of mind that I won't be affected by data breaches of companies I've never heard of, and that people also aren't going to be able to just search up my home address or phone number. And if this sounds like something you want to get in on, then head on over to incogni.com/ZoeB or click the link that's in the description and use code ZoeB to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/ZoeB using code ZoeB to take your personal data off the market. But with that, let's get into things, shall we? When you open up an I Spy book, it's a little overwhelming. Like, there's a lot going on here. It's kind of overstimulating. But honestly, I love these kinds of pictures, especially the ones that don't have any empty space like the marbles and the toy box. There's something about that visual density and busyness that just makes my ADHD brain go burr. On first glance, all of these are absolute chaos. But like I mentioned in the intro, if you look a little bit closer, there's actually logic and order underlying this chaos. Most of the items are facing the camera, they're spaced evenly, and the shot composition is balanced and has visual interest. In other words, these pictures were clearly made with intention and skill by a professional photographer, because they were. The authors, writer Jean Marzolo and photographer Walter Wick, both of whom seem like just lovely people who are truly passionate about education and joy and play, and they just seem super freaking cool. Anyway, both Marzolo and Wick have been very open about their process for making these books, and in the back of every book, they actually give readers advice for how to make their own I Spy puzzles. One of the most interesting bits of information from an interview with Marzolo is that she and Wick actually worked on their respective sections simultaneously. According to an interview transcript on her website, she couldn't write the riddles first because then she would be telling Walter what to put in the pictures and he wouldn't like that. And he can't make the pictures first because then he'd be telling her what to write about. So they work on the books together. She explains that it usually begins with one of them suggesting a theme for a picture, and then Wick will start setting up the shot and making sure to use objects that have good rhyming potential, and Marzolo will suggest a couple particular objects that she wants hidden within there, and then there's some more back and forth until the picture comes together. As part of that process, Marzolo and Wick know that there has to be enough visual clutter to make the objects difficult to spot, but not so much that it becomes frustrating or overwhelming, especially for their intended audience of grade school kids. So, in setting up the shots, Wick spends a lot of time making sure that the objects feel like they belong. Their orientation and spacing feel busy but intentional. There's a feeling of movement and energy in the composition while not being too chaotic. But that raises the question of why? Like, if the purpose of I Spy is to find things hidden in a picture, then why not just throw a bunch of stuff on the ground and then take a picture of it? Why do the authors go through all of this work to make the pictures complicated and chaotic and busy without actually being truly random? Wouldn't true randomness make for a more interesting, or at least more challenging, game of I Spy? When it comes down to it, functionally, what is the difference between I Spy and looking for a needle in a haystack? Well, we can actually see what happens when you try to make a truly chaotic I Spy. Some students have attempted to create their own I Spy style images, but they feel different, right? They feel messy rather than playful, overwhelming rather than intriguing. But what specifically makes the official I Spy images more compelling than these student-made ones? Well, aside from the fact that Walter Wick is a professional photographer who has practiced framing and shot composition for decades, these student-made pictures clearly have themes, but for most of these, it looks like the objects were just kind of dumped on the ground. And without any kind of structure to the images, without an underlying logic or visible intentionality, our brains struggle to latch on to anything or find meaning. It's just too messy. Now, I don't mean any shade towards the literal children who made these, they're really not that bad. It's just that contrasting them with the professional I Spy images does a good job of showing that our brains want that underlying order and logic. To show you what I mean, let me give you another example of this. It's fairly well known that the shuffle settings on Spotify and iTunes aren't actually randomly shuffling your songs. This is because true randomness doesn't feel random to us. Actual randomness is chaotic and unpredictable, but what our brains think randomness is relatively uniform distribution. So when Spotify used a true randomness for their shuffle feature, it ended up sometimes putting songs by the same artist or even from the same album back to back, because random doesn't discriminate, and sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. But it doesn't feel random, right? A random shuffle should, so our brains think, spread out all of our artists and albums. Sure, we shuffle our music because we want it to be unpredictable, but we want it to be unpredictable in predictable ways. So, Spotify and iTunes had to come up with a new shuffle algorithm that wasn't actually random, but whatever our brains think randomness should look like. They changed their algorithm so they would purposefully avoid putting songs from the same artist or album next to each other in the queue, even if that's what a truly randomly generated shuffle would have done. And just like how we don't actually want real randomness in our music shuffling, we don't want real chaos in our I Spy pictures either. We want pictures that feel chaotic and messy and busy, but without all the weird discomfort that comes from something actually being chaotic. Because human brains really don't like chaos. What we like is having recognizable images and familiar patterns we can latch onto. And the true randomness and chaos of reality just don't give us that. So we have to fake it. And that's what Walter Wick does. He gives us I Spy pictures that are supposed to feel chaotic, but which have a sort of coherent logic that grounds them in something familiar. All I Spy pages have some kind of order or logic to them. Even the most chaotic ones have their objects evenly distributed across the page. Others are explicitly organized, like these, which have discrete themed spaces for items organized by number or by type. I especially love this one because at first glance it just looks like a random assortment of objects that have just been clustered into rings, but really it's a massive Venn diagram. Each ring is a category, like of people or wheeled objects or animals, and they overlap to be inclusive of objects that fit within more than one category, like this wheeled duck over here. Honestly, I could talk about just this page for an entire video. Like, I know that it's kind of a meme at this point, but I genuinely love Venn diagrams. But moving on, other pages have a kind of verisimilitude or natural logic to them. They have streets that look like real streets, shop windows that look like real shop windows, and nature that looks like real nature. Some of them, like the forest scene in particular, follow more of a make-believe logic than a strictly realistic logic, but what matters is that the images are internally consistent. There are also pictures with what I call physical logic, which are ones with Rube Goldberg type machines that you can run through in your head. You can see the movement and interaction between the objects. You can see the cause and effect even within a static image. My favorites, though, are the pages that evoke a kind of narrative version of pareidolia, the phenomenon where human brains have a tendency to see recognizable shapes like faces in things. In these pictures, we can see what look like real lives. This corkboard could belong to a real parent keeping track of all their kids' drawings and awards and photos. This could be a picture of a real vanity in a real kid's bedroom. Hell, I had a jewelry box like that when I was a kid, and I also kept little figurines and jars full of shells on my dresser. All of these pictures look like they could be real, and because of that, we can imagine the lives that they imply. We can imagine the child who this bedroom belongs to. We can imagine the smell of this dusty cabinet and the person who put all the little trinkets in it. We can imagine the students who wrote about their favorite dinosaurs and drew pictures of them, and the teacher who hung those drawings on the wall. These pages are snapshots of the stories of the lives implied within the photographs. And I just think that's neat. All I Spy pages have some kind of internal logic. They're visually busy and might not look logical at first glance, but they do have an underlying order to them. And I think that this is why I Spy is so appealing. We don't like true chaos because there's no underlying logic, but the pictures in I Spy books feel chaotic while promising that there is logic within them. They reward you with order and meaning if you just stop to look for it. Even the game of I Spy adds to this because it gives us rules and structure and objective right answers. True chaos, on the other hand, doesn't have a win condition. These books are appealing because they give us a safe space to practice finding logic in chaos, and also because they take advantage of our brain's tendency to make connections between otherwise unconnected data, what's called apophenia. Human brains like finding patterns, finding that underlying logic and familiarity, because that's how we make sense of the chaos around us, and we've been doing that forever. Thousands of years ago, we took the chaos and randomness of the stars and drew lines between them, making constellations that were vital to culture and navigation. Storytelling is squishy and abstract, but by finding patterns across stories, we started organizing our art into discrete genres. We noticed similarities in the shape of continents and came up with a theory of plate tectonics. And we used patterns in the properties of elements to build the periodic table even before discovering the existence of some of the elements that we'd reasoned out just had to exist. Hell, most of science is just pattern recognition. But this desire for structure is also what fuels belief in conspiracy theories, superstition, and prejudice. The same pattern recognition that makes you think that one pair of lucky socks is the reason your team made it to the playoffs also led phrenologists to believe that skull shape determined intelligence. And it's the same reason people see that kids develop signs of autism around the same age they get a lot of vaccines, and then conclude that there must be a link between the two. In reality, none of these things are related. Your socks have nothing to do with the success of your team, skull shape has nothing to do with intelligence, and vaccines do not cause autism. But because success, intelligence, and autism are all super complicated and in many ways defy understanding, it's easier for a lot of people to just stick with the simple answer. For better or for worse, we can't help but impose structures on everything we interact with, even if it means simplifying things down into easy, broad heuristics. We want to find logic that explains the chaos of reality because chaos is scary. The universe is big and life is messy. And if we really had to come to terms with how little we actually understand, let alone have control over, it would terrify us. I think a lot of us have actually become intimately familiar with just how terrifying this is. When COVID hit, I don't think any of us were expecting it to turn out the way it did. I was finishing up grad school when it started, and I remember joking with my classmates about it before we knew how bad it really was. But the thing that I remember most is how quickly everything shut down. Other schools were closing, so we knew that ours would be too, but we just didn't know when. So in addition to being a student, I also taught a couple of undergrad classes, and I was teaching on Monday, Wednesday, Friday that semester. When we got the email that the school was going to be going remote effective immediately, it was Tuesday. I never got to say goodbye to my students. I was so angry. It wasn't fair. I had plans. My husband and I were both graduating from our respective grad programs that spring, and we had all of these plans to move out of the state and actually put down roots and start being real adults. But the universe doesn't care about your plans. COVID wasn't actually the first time that I'd had to face something like that, though. In 2019, just 4 days after celebrating our first wedding anniversary, I had to take my husband to the emergency room for what turned out to be a very serious medical complication from a health issue he had had as a baby. By the time we got into a room, he was in so much pain, his body was shaking uncontrollably. I'd never seen anything like it before. When they found out what the issue was, the doctor told us he was glad we'd come in when we did because if we'd waited another day or two, I can't describe how it felt when my first thought after being told how bad it could have been was, but I'm too young to be a widow. It turned out okay. He's fine, and I got his permission to talk about this, but it was scary. It was really scary. And that hospital stay and the ensuing months of recovery were hard. And it was my first confrontation with the fact that life is fragile. Anything can happen at any time, and so we need to take this time, right now, to hold on to the people we love. And, of course, now those of us in the United States are becoming intimately familiar with how fragile democracy is. The steamrolling of our institutions is going to take years to rebuild, if it's even possible at all. and I found myself mourning the loss of a future I thought I would have. I have problems with this country, and I'm not really a baseball and apple pie patriot or anything, but I at least imagined a future here, a future that included normal functioning democracy and an intact constitution. But now, life is messy, but humans don't like messy. We like order and peace and predictability, and history has proven that we're willing to do terrible things to achieve that. Humans are so creative. We've come up with so many ways to organize things into groups and structure ourselves and put labels on everything we can think of. It's really a charming quirk of ours, I think. But we also have a tendency to forget that all of these groups and structures and labels are made up. They're artificial, and even more than that, they're imperfect. No personality type or IQ score is going to be able to completely capture the complexity of who someone is. There is no objective physical truth to days of the week or hours on the clock. The measure of time is something we just made up. Vegetable, as a category, is functionally meaningless. There are so many complicated, messy, abstract, chaotic concepts in the universe, and we can't help but simplify them down and shove them into neatly labeled boxes. But what do we do with that? If chaos is scary and we create all these structures to impose some order onto that chaos, even if some of those structures oversimplify things at best and actively harm others at worst, what do we do with that information? Where do we go from here? I don't have an answer to that question. In fact, I don't think it can be answered in a video, especially not a silly little video like this. I think I would need a whole year's worth of videos to answer it. So, that's what I'm gonna do. This is the question that I'll be trying to answer across my next videos. Over the next year or so, I want to explore chaos and all the ways we've tried to impose order onto it in a variety of contexts from a bunch of different angles, and ultimately try to use that information to help us get through the current moment we find ourselves in. Existence is scary, but I hope that by investigating the chaos of it all, I'll be able to share some lessons that offer hope in a time when hope feels like a luxury. So, I hope that you will join me on this journey that I'm embarking on from here. And if you want to make sure to catch those videos when they come out, then be sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. I also want to take this time to just thank all of you for being patient with me while I was on a little bit of an internet break. Honestly, it was really great to just unplug for a couple of months, but I am very excited to be back. Speaking of thank yous, I want to give a huge thanks to all of my patrons whose names are scrolling over here, and an extra special thanks to Hugh Sophia, Justin Lowry, Megan Lowndes, and Shep Alderson. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this video is a fundraiser, and I just wouldn't be able to do that without the help from my patrons. So again, thank you all so much for making this possible. If you want to join my Patreon and help me to do all the things that I do, there's a link in the description, or you can go to patreon.com/Zoe_B, where along with helping me out, you will get early and ad-free access to my videos, and you also have a chance of having one of my end of video poems dedicated to you, which I would be reading right now, but it turns out that I read the script a lot faster than I thought I would, and so the scroll is still going. Let's see, how can I fill the time? I realized as I was editing this script that I never really tie up the I Spy stuff at the end. So yeah, this video was about I Spy, sorta, kinda, a little bit. Definitely check them out if you have not read them since childhood. They really are great, and highly recommend. They are also all available for free if you have an account on the Internet Archive. Not sponsored, but I like the Internet Archive. I think they're doing good work, and you can just borrow the books for free. So check them out. But speaking of poems, it's time for my patron poem of the video for Bushido Boy. Here is Ghosts. The universe is full of ghosts, they say. The light of a star that died before we knew the word for sky. The dust of a world that burned before we learned the shape of sound. The bones of a creature who crawled from the sea into the sun and gasped its first breath of something like oxygen, only to starve alone in a field of tall grass. As the universe pulls itself apart at the seams, loose threads of entropy spreading like tendrils, we sit on a rock and measure the echoes of ghosts and name them like it matters. Because it does. And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon. I hope. Bye, folks. Also, let me know if you like this sort of like projectory setup. I think it's kind of fun. But let me know what you think, and I can do more videos like this, because it's silly, and I'm trying to try new things. But yeah, so let me know in the comments if you like this and I can do more of this, or if not and you found it distracting and are like, Zoe, no, stop. Then just say that and I will. I think that's it. That's probably it. Yeah, probably. If I think of anything else, then I can tough.